When a guy returns from a business trip with a sharp pain in his head, his wife suggests that he visit the hospital to get it examined. There, the physician examines his forehead more closely before yelling, "God, no," when he learns the startling reason for the discomfort. James Carter clenched his teeth as yet another searing sensation ripped through his skull. This pulsating, scorching agony that was restricted to the left side of his forehead had persisted for 3 days. He had never experienced a headache or even a migraine like this before, and he was at a loss for ways to alleviate the discomfort. Nothing, not even a small bit, was making it easier. At first, he passed it off as a headache due to lack of sleep, lack of water, and daily stresses. But when it continued for a few days, he was forced to admit that it might be a migraine. He'd never really experienced one before. But if this was what it felt like, he never wanted to experience one again. He tried everything that was recommended, laying down in a dark room, a cold compress on his head, plenty of water and rest, but the pain just wouldn't let up. Then he started to panic a little. What if this was something far more serious? After all, what migraine made your skin feel like it was moving? James genuinely thought he was losing his mind. He knew his skin couldn't be moving, yet he couldn't shake. The feeling were hallucinations. A migraine symptom? He didn't think so, but he was too scared to consider what else might be happening to him. After days of rest, he emerged from his bedroom. He had things to do, and he couldn't spend another second in bed. When he caught sight of himself in the mirror, he was shocked by how terrible he looked. Slowly, he stumbled downstairs with the most severe pain he'd ever experienced. Pulsing in his head, he made it as far as the kitchen, all the while feeling sure he was going to pass out. Leaning over the kitchen sink, he gripped the edges to steady himself. His vision blurred for a moment, sweat dripping from his brow. He wasn't sure if he should sit down for fear of fainting or stay stood over the sink for fear of vomiting. "James, you're scaring me," his wife, Laura, said. Stepping closer, "You need to see a doctor." Laura had been willing to accept that he'd perhaps picked up a harmless bug or had just worked himself to exhaustion when he'd first returned from his work trip. But now she wasn't so sure. He looked absolutely awful. She'd been sleeping in the spare room so as to not catch anything, and James had been keeping their bedroom dark so she hadn't properly seen just how bad things were. But now, in broad daylight, he looked like something from a horror movie. James exhaled sharply. "I don't need a doctor, Laura. He winced. As another sharp sting pulsed through his scalp, he grabbed the nearest chair and collapsed into it. "Can I at least take a look at your head?" she asked. James nodded. He had no idea what she expected to find. It wasn't like you could see a migraine, but he didn't have the energy to argue with her. He closed his eyes as she slowly started to feel around his head, parting his hair. Suddenly, she gently pressed on his forehead, and a huge stab of pain shot through him. On impulse, he almost hit her hand away, but stopped himself when he heard her scream. "What is that?" James turned around so quickly. His head spun what he repeated. He expected to find his wife still hovering over him, but Laura had already staggered away from him. He slowly turned to look at her. Her eyes were wide in horror. "James, I felt a lump, and I swear it moved," she whispered. James froze, what Laura hesitated, then reached out again and brushed her fingers lightly against his forehead. There's something under your skin." James rushed to the bathroom mirror. He peeled back his hair and felt his stomach drop. A small, swollen lump protruded from his forehead, but no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't see any movement. Yet something about Laura's words made him feel sick. He thought back to when he'd been laid in bed and he was sure he'd felt his skin moving. His breath caught in his throat. What if something was inside him? Laura was right, he did need to see a doctor, but there was no point in going to the GP. He needed to go to the hospital. He swallowed down the bile that was rising up. The thought of something being inside him filled him with fear. He shouted down to Laura that they needed to go to the hospital, and he heard her scrambling for the car keys. Whatever she'd seen or thought she'd seen had clearly terrified her. In the emergency room, James fidgeted uncomfortably. The longer he sat there, the longer he was left with his thoughts, and they weren't a pleasant place to be right now. Every now and then he caught Laura looking at his head as if she was trying to see it moving again. The pain seemed to be intensifying with every passing second, and now he couldn't shake the dark thoughts about what might be causing it. Eventually, James's name was called, and Laura helped him to his feet and supported him as they slowly walked into the examination room. Dr. Ethan Grayson listened carefully as they explained what was happening. Laura told the doctor all about the movement she'd seen, but James still tried to brush it off. The reality that she had seen something moving under his skin was just too much to cope with. The doctor frowned, inspecting the lump with gloved hands. "You said you've been feeling pain for 3 days," Dr. Grayson asked. James nodded. "It's getting worse. Feels like something is biting me from the inside." Dr. Grayson exchanged a look with the attending nurse. "Have you traveled recently?" "Yeah, I got back from Brazil. A couple of weeks ago, I was in the Amazon for work." The doctor's frown deepened as he asked James if he'd noticed any insect bites. James explained that he'd had a couple of mosquito bites, but nothing serious and certainly nothing he hadn't experienced before. Traveling to these remote places for work came with risk, but James had always been sure to stay up to date with his shots and follow all the travel guidelines. It was part of his job. After all, there was no room to be anything but overly cautious, and so far it had kept him fit and healthy. But the doctor's line of questioning seemed to suggest that he hadn't taken as many precautions as he should have, and he was getting agitated. He ran his hand through his hair, but winced at the severe pain on his forehead. Again, Dr. Grayson sighed. "You'll be happy to know I haven't seen anything moving, but I do need to do a CT scan to see what's going on." He went on to explain that there was what appeared to be a small bite on James's head, which was now swollen. This would explain the lump, but it shouldn't be causing the pain the young man was describing. Half an hour later, Dr. Grayson sat in front of the glowing screen, staring at James's scan. At first, everything looked normal. Then, as he zoomed in, he saw a dark, elongated mass lodged just beneath the skin. He squinted, then jumped up from his chair, rushing over to James. He parted the young man's hair once again and looked at the lump before tentatively pressing a gloved hand to it. Dr. Grayson's stomach turned. "God, no!" he screamed, pulling his hand back sharply. A shiver ran up his spine. He turned to the nurse beside him and whispered, "We need to prepare him for surgery now." James and Laura looked at the doctor, feeling sick with worry. What on earth was going on? What had he seen to cause such a reaction? But when the doctor finally composed himself enough to answer their questions, it definitely wasn't what they wanted to hear. Dr. Grayson explained that Laura had been right. There was something moving under James's skin. They needed to do a minor procedure to remove whatever it was. A few minutes later, James lay back on the hospital hiddle bed as Dr. Grayson prepared him for the minor procedure. "I need you to stay as still as possible," the doctor instructed. He told the young man that the local anesthetic should mean he wouldn't feel a thing, but it was important to keep still. James swallowed. "Just tell me what it is when you get it out." Minutes felt like hours as Dr. Grayson made a small incision over the swollen lump. The second the scalpel broke the skin, something twitched. Dr. Grayson pressed gently, trying to guide it out. Then suddenly the thing moved downward. Dr. Grayson's heart slammed against his ribs. Whatever was inside the young man's head was retreating and burrowing deeper into James's flesh. Dr. Grayson reacted instantly. Grabbing forceps, he widened the incision slightly, carefully maneuvering the instrument deeper into the wound. Fluid oozed from the opening, and James felt the warm liquid on his head. Then it happened. As Dr. Grayson adjusted his grip, something long, thick, and writhing burst halfway out of the hole. The doctor flinched, nearly dropping the forceps. The creature wriggled violently, its thick, segmented body pulsing as if gasping for breath. Dr. Grayson's eyes widened in horror. "Oh my God," he gasped, staggering back. James, still awake but heavily sedated, groggy, muttered, What is it?" The nurse beside him gagged. "Dear Lord," Dr. Grayson quickly regained his composure. "I need suction and saline now. Just keep still, James." That was easier said than done, though, as James was full-on panicking. Now the horrific reactions of Dr. Grayson and the nurse had terrified him. The doctor pulled, and James felt a dull tugging sensation in his head. He was desperate to know what was going on, but he just had to put his faith in the doctor and hope everything would be okay. A sickening squelch filled the room. Then with one final pop, whatever had been in James's head came free. He saw a nurse holding out a dish and something dropped into it. Although he couldn't see what it was, the thought that something had just been pulled out of his head made his stomach churn. Eventually, Dr. Grayson announced that they were stitching him back up. "Don't worry, we'll have a chat when we're all done here," he reassured James. Back in Dr. Grayson's office, Laura and James waited for news. James's head was sporting a couple of fresh stitches, but the relief he felt was immense. He knew he was still feeling the effects of the anesthetic, but he felt certain that when it wore off, the severe pain would be gone. Dr. Grayson held on to a dish similar to what James had seen in the operating room. He lowered it down so Laura and James could see what was inside. The doctor hesitated. "I believe an insect larvae burrowed into your skin scalp." Laura gasped. "Oh my God." James's pulse quickened. He closed his eyes and took a few deep breaths, fighting the urge to vomit. "You're telling me something's been living in my head for weeks?" Dr. Grayson nodded. "We see cases like this in travelers returning from tropical regions, though it's rare for them to burrow so deep. That's why we needed to extract it quickly." James, still dazed, turned his head slightly. "What the hell is that thing exactly?" Dr. Grayson let out a breath. "A human botfly larvae. It could have been buried there for weeks." Laura covered her mouth in horror. James exhaled shakily. He dared to look at the larvae again. Its fat body repulsed him, as did the thought that it had been moving around in his head all this time, and he brushed it off as a migraine. Even when his wife had sworn that she'd seen something moving, he'd refused to believe her at first. Yet here was the evidence. In a dish in front of him, he thought back to his recent work trip. He'd followed all the usual precautions and believed that he'd left the Amazon with nothing more than a couple of mosquito bites. But all the while, this thing had been making a home in his head. Suddenly, he felt faint again. Dr. Grayson continued to talk, but James wasn't taking anything in. Now he hazily focused on the odd word and managed to piece together that the doctor was telling him that, had it been left any longer, the larvae could have caused a brain infection. All James could focus on, though, was the sickening image of the fat larvae burrowing under his skin. He sank back into the chair and rubbed his temples, being careful not to touch the stitches. This is a lot to take in. Laura squeezed his hand supportively, but he could see that she had tears in her eyes. Thank God she had looked at his head. He didn't even want to think about what might have happened had she not. Dr. Grayson assured them that these things happened and that it was a rare occurrence. He told James that he had had all the right precautions in place for repelling insects, but sometimes nature just had a smart way of getting around things. His words put the young man's mind at ease a little, but he wasn't sure how he felt about future work trips. He never wanted to experience anything like this nightmare again. 2 weeks later, James was sitting on the porch enjoying the fresh evening air. The scar on his forehead was healing well. As soon as the local anesthetic had worn off, he'd felt the instant relief he'd been hoping for. And every day had been better, since he still couldn't quite believe that he'd had a botfly larvae living in his head and that it had caused such severe pain. But slowly the horrific images were fading from his mind. Laura handed him a beer and sat beside him for the first time in weeks. Their conversation began with something other than headaches or strange creatures. It felt like things were returning to normal. Laura had been on high alert when they returned from the hospital, asking him at least every hour if he was feeling okay. She'd also deep cleaned the entire house, as if scared that there could be something lurking there. For his part, James had asked not to be sent on any work trips for a little while. He didn't want to avoid them forever, but it just felt too soon. Right now, he smiled at Laura. He had been lucky. If it hadn't been for her, then he knew he'd have left things even longer before he'd got the pain checked out. And if they hadn't caught it in time, he might not have been the only one living in his own body, and that was not a thought he intended to entertain. What a horrific experience. Did you know that a botfly larva could do this? Do you know any other stories on strange insect bites? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.